Real quick before we get into the interview. One of the first exercises I run with executive teams is mapping their business portfolio to visualize the current work in progress and how it aligns to the overall business strategy. Now, without exception, every time I run this exercise, the gap between the current state and desired state is far wider than every executive believed, hoped, or even imagined. I've put the exact template to use, how I do this, and made it free for all of you to download by following the link in the comments. Go get your copy and let me know how it goes. Now back to the show. Welcome to the Unlearn podcast. On this show, I'm delighted to be joined by Paola Santana, a lawyer, public procurement expert, and serial tech entrepreneur, creating the next breakthrough in government systems. She's the founder and CEO of Glass, a startup revolutionizing how governments buy with pioneering G-commerce. Previously, she co-founded Matternet, a company pioneering drone logistics networks. Under her leadership, Matternet engaged with the White House, US Congress, and NASA to enact the first drone regulation in the US in 2016, and became the first drone delivery platform authorized for permanent operations over a populated city in 2017. She's also co-established the Dominican Republic's Constitutional Court and worked with the National Elections Court there as well. She's best known for her ability to create things from scratch at the intersection of public and private and regulation domains, and her track record is nothing short of outstanding. I've met her as a co-faculty at Singularity University, where she's given amazing talks about revolutionizing government tech. So in this show, let's go back to where it began for her own personal story and inspiration to tackle this amazing space and all the amazing projects she's been doing. Enjoying the podcast? Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube. This way, you won't miss any episode, and it greatly supports our podcast. For most people probably looking at your career, they see this list of everything from, building businesses and drone delivery type programs, right through to being parts of programs at NASA and Google's Accelerator program. You even work with the BART, which is so fun, trying to sort out public transport in the US, which I think, especially in San Francisco, I think we're all going to be happy about that. When you think about what you're doing today, often I feel like there's these sort of turning points for many people in their career where maybe something that didn't mean a huge amount at the time, but when you look back in retrospect, you're like, actually, this was a really formative moment that sort of shifted my mindset and thinking about how I end up doing the things that I'm doing today. So when I ask you that question, what are some of the things that pop into your mind?
The first thing is that for the level of clarity that someone like me has, where I've always known or carved moments to get very clear on where I wanted to go, the best plan, the more clear plan would have never gotten me here. So it's only by going very aggressively after what I wanted, but having this very contrarian way of also staying open, that I've been able to be where I am today, look back and understand technology entrepreneurship is allowing me to do what I thought that I could do through politics. If you would have asked me 20 years ago, do you want to be a technology entrepreneur? I had never heard the word entrepreneurship. Even, probably until 2 years ago, many people was asking me oh, where did you learn entrepreneurship? Who is a business person in your family? And I would tell them nobody. But the funny thing is that my mom is a doctor, medical doctor, and she has had her private practice for the last 30 years. And the one thing I've seen is a very hardworking single mom, raising 4 children and always being working, always being on top of her children, and at the same time running her private office that is like a big non-invasive healthcare center in the Dominican Republic. So I remember going to work with her since I was 13, doing the one setting up appointments and swiping the credit cards and putting prices on the products. And I remember I also had a jewelry shop, and then I hear other entrepreneurs saying that since they were 10 years old, they're selling things and whatnot. And I'm like, oh, I've never done that. And then I'm like, wait a second. I've done all of that. I used to sell at the school break, and I used to work with my mom, and I used to be her assistant and put prices and do all these things. And my mom is an amazing health entrepreneur, but I didn't see her as an entrepreneur, just as probably she still today, being from an older generation, she doesn't see herself as a CEO. She thinks she's a doctor with a medical practice. So it's all of these seeing things from a different lens, from a distance, from many different angles that have allowed me to, I would say, create this very flexible, elastic mindset that I have when I look at things. And that also applies to when I look at my own career and my own path and my own way of solving problems.
Yeah, what a great role model to have, straight out the door. So I think, obviously your family is such a formative part of who many of us are, but to have such a great role model who would build their own business, look after a family, being small and still given jobs to contribute to such a family business as it grows, right? They're all great sort of learning experiences that, as you say, to you probably feel like that's just the way things were. But intuitively, there's all these small lessons that you're picking up about managing people, understanding complex tasks, solving things, figuring out solutions. It's a sort of very special gift for maybe your parents to offer you, your mom especially, in such a situation like that. So as you started to then move forward into your career, right, you've done some fascinating things. I first sort of met you when you were giving a talk around government tech at Singularity University's flagship conference in San Francisco. And it was fascinating to hear you explore trying to use tech to improve government services, to make things less bureaucratic, faster, clarity of decision making. So tell us how you sort of got started yourself on this sort of path, right? Like you've done very interesting things, like starting off in the legal space and then like moving into various different roles from there. So what sort of got you on that sort of journey where you decided, right, this is an area that I have passion for, that I want to invest my time and energy in, but also change how it operates? What were some of the things that, as you sort of started off, you started to discover?
I love this saying attributed to Steve Jobs: you can only connect the dots looking backwards. So I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic, a very wealthy country, very poorly managed, where resources are not, they don't get to the bottom line. And I was born in a middle class family where everybody had to work. All of my uncles, my aunts, and my mom, they came from the countryside. So they were first generation um, professionals. They all went to the public university system, most of them with like a scholarship, but all of them are professionals. All of them got to have a master's and whatnot, because in Latin America, you need education, you need formal side of education, and you need those certificates posted on your wall to remind yourself and others that you are qualified to do something. You really need to stand out in order to make it in these emerging economies. So growing up in a very, I would say, Latin America is also very political. People have a say, people have opinions, people are passionate about change. And I grew up in the 80s and the 90s where there was a lot of political promise and political movement. And seeing that, I thought, if I wanted to transform my country, the way I think that happens, it's coming from the government and the politics side. And then I want to be a politician because I don't want to do change that is little. I've always thought big. So I was thinking, how do I create big change? Well, you run for office and then you become president of your country, and then you get to provide healthcare access to everyone, or everyone to be able to have dignity because they have the opportunity to have an identity, and with an identity they can uh, put their kids in public school that is actually best in class school because it's the one where the most resources are being spent. So since very little, I had this sense of not justice for the sake of equality, but justice for the sake of, I see all this wealth. Why doesn't more people have access to it? So I did law school to become a politician. During law school, I got to work into the elections court for 4 years. I started as a legal assistant and ended up in 3 months, like running part of the court, digitalizing a bunch of documents with Word templates because I've always been very curious. So if I would get like a new cell phone, I had my first one at 15. I would punch every button, every feature, everything. Like I understood the systems. I like understanding systems from every angle and customizing things, whatnot. When Gmail launched, I was one of the first ones to have Gmail. So I'm not going to say a techie, but I'm always like an early adopter. So I remember going into the court and wanting to digitalize things because we had very few personnel. So I needed to make sure that I had things under control with few people that were not super, I'm going to say, well educated. So I started working at public sector then. And then at some point I had the opportunity to also co-establish the first constitutional court from scratch. The court was, imagine here we have the Supreme Court that does like the constitutional function and also like other type of functions. And then when you remove the constitutional function and make a body, a legal body that is on top of the president of my country, in my case, we created that court from scratch back in 2012. So I had the opportunity to help establish that court like from scratch. And that hunger to work in public sector allowed me to dream about, how do the governments of the future operate? How does that happen? I applied to a Fulbright scholarship. I did a very interesting thesis work, kind of proving that it's impossible to have democracy through political parties. That here's the first unlearning. Here's the first counterintuitive thing. The gist of it is I'm a very pragmatic person. I need to understand things very clearly. So basically, having access to the elections court, I was able to get access to the data of what was happening inside political parties' conventions. And what I discovered is that these conventions were more of a show or a performance, but the real decisions were made by the political committee and they were made behind closed doors. So by the time the assembly, all of us were making a decision, those decisions have been constrained to 2 options or 3 options where the political committee had already decided what they wanted. So my question was, this is the data. And when you ask questions to members of political parties, you tell them, are you democratic? They say yes. You're okay. Okay. Do you have access to political education? They say yes. Did you have access to financial resources to run your campaign when you run for office? They say no. Did you win? No. But is your party democratic? Yes. So democracy has a couple of very specific features: open communication, horizontally and vertically, equal access to resources, equal access to airtime, equal access to run for office, internal office or external office. And it's interesting that in paper and in perception, everybody says we're doing those things. But when you go to the data, those things are not being executed. So my question was, if democracy is being executed through political parties when they get to office, how can the institution in charge of executing democracy be democratic when they win, when they are not democratic with their membership on their day-to-day? How does that happen? And I presented that research to the Fulbright Committee. Fulbright is a very important scholarship provided to people that want to do certain studies. I applied and I got that scholarship. And instead of going to Europe to do my master's in constitutional law or something like that, I came to the United States, to Washington, D.C., to the political capital of the world, to figure out what was the future of governments or what was after democracy. Because in my view, what everybody had said that was the best invention of democracy, of modern democracy, that were the political parties, it seemed to me that was the actual roadblock to have real, representative, meaningful democracy. So that's what brought me to the United States. I did my master's, didn't find any aha moment during my master's, found more of the same, another contrasting moment for me. I was thinking I have the best scholarship that I can have. I am on the political capital of the world. And the conversation is 10% more sophisticated than in the Dominican Republic. So if this is the political capital of the world with better buildings, bigger everything, and this is just 10% better than a 13 million people country, this is not the system that is going to create massive positive change in my lifetime. Did a step back, asked a larger question: what system is changing the world today? What is the name? Where are those people? What are they studying? What are they leading? What are they doing? Heard about Silicon Valley, a place where people that wanted to learn technology and build technology applied to any field. They could go and learn technology. I applied to Singularity University. Back then they had a summer program where you were able to go and eat, sleep, learn, lecture at NASA Ames. NASA Ames is one of the NASA campuses, I would say at the epicenter of Silicon Valley. And I applied, I got that scholarship, and I literally got away from government. That's how I started my first tech startup, trying to look into solving first and last mile challenges for lack of transportation. Again, something that government should have built. Many people think that when I was building drones for transportation, I was doing drones. I was like, no, I am building the public infrastructure to connect the communities that governments should have connected. So instead of going to Congress, so hopefully they pass a law, so hopefully they enable a budget, so hopefully they build the road, I just build a system that is a fraction of the cost and is not going to move a person, but is going to move something so that person can have access to healthcare and access to their local markets. So I started to see that I could choose between team regulator or team creator, that the team regulator, the team politics, the team law came after someone had decided to put something out there in the world more often than not, and that I could not invest all my time and my effort into running for office so I could win office. So by the time I want to implement something, I'm already tired, as opposed to better being tired at doing the thing, as opposed to asking permission to do the thing. So I found a hack in entrepreneurship, and this is why I'm here today.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating sort of debate, you know. As someone who obviously trained in the beginning to sort of go into the public systems and improve them and make this sort of systemic impact, right, to improve the lives of millions of people by building better systems that allow, you know, for greater access to healthcare, education, you know, some of the key, most important parts to sort of, you know, continue to grow these massive economies. And then contrasting that with the, as you say, working on the creator side or maybe corporate side, where you're working on problems that are, you know, struggling to be solved by the system, if you will, or the government system at least. And you're talking about tackling this idea of drones and the last mile and delivery systems, where is often, you know, a lot of these cases where people might be in, you know, difficult, low socioeconomic areas with low infrastructure availability and so forth. And you're trying to help solve, again, this sort of public problem through entrepreneurship. So that's a sort of fascinating juxtapose, right? Most people who listen to the show know my wife works for the World Health Organization, and the endless dinner debate in our house is, well, we need public systems at some level because they solve for the populace, and often the corporate does not always solve. It solves for a niche and then tries to grow to a certain scale of populace. So it's always a fun debate in our house anyway about like how to do this. You know, my natural reaction as an entrepreneur is, well, there's great tech that can dive in there and fix that. And yet my wife will be like, well, hang on a sec. There's more than just tech to solve problems, right? These are public health issues, especially in her case. It's like, there's different types of bureaucracy that's required to get more people on board to sort of solve these problems. So what are the things that you've taken from both sides you think that have helped you as you continue to sort of do the work that you're doing today? What are some of the nuances that you think are similar? I'd love to hear your contrast on, what both of those sort of operating modes look like.
This is a fascinating question. So what I've learned through entrepreneurship is that the best version of my idea, the version of my idea that can transform the world, is never the first version of my idea. And it never transformed the world on my computer or on my brain. It needs to get out. It actually doesn't even change the world, in my opinion, or in my amazing debate. And that is totally contrarian to my education as an attorney or as a lawyer or as a politician, writing amazing reports and writing 300 pages World Bank reports where we analyze all the data. But is the data moving the needle?
The data, the argument.
Is the data moving the needle? Exactly, this report says we are 1% better. Let me see it in the table of the people where they are having dinner or on the education that their kids received. And it's something interesting because in public sector, it's very important that we start tracking things better. GLASS is literally, the name came very intuitively to me, and I've been unpacking what the name of GLASS means. GLASS is not just transparency and being able to see something better. It's that we cannot change what we cannot see. You're not going to take action if you think that something is wrong, is not wrong. And governments, because they have this need to say that they are taking charge of things, that they are on top of things, they eliminate the necessity, even internally, to look at themselves and say, guys, we're really not doing this. So you need to look like you know what you're doing. You need to talk like you know what you're doing. And then at some point, what you communicate to your brain as a government person is, we know what we're doing. And the moment you say that you know what you're doing, because you don't do what you think you're already doing, you think you're killing it. You think you are really being very successful. And at some point you stop asking the questions and going to search for the solutions to really crack the problems, because in the first place, you think you're cracking it. And it's interesting how everybody falls into that trap. So the interesting thing about the private sector and entrepreneurship is grueling. You either have results or you don't. And if you don't have results, you're not going to grow. You're not going to be able to hire. You're not going to be able to fundraise. You're not going to be able to do nothing. And if you don't grow, you die. And that's the beauty of entrepreneurship. The change and the growth is obvious. You feel it, you see it, there's a result. In public sector, it seems like it's more abstract. Like someone wrote something on the newspaper and maybe this is happening, maybe it's not happening. So the biggest difference is that I see the private sector doing things that are not even life altering, sticking to KPIs and performance and data and metrics. And then you have key functions like access to healthcare, access to education, access to great sanitation systems, things that affect and impact the life of all of us, being treated without a KPI, without any sense of urgency to move the needle. And I am so grateful that entrepreneurship has given me this ability to know if I'm moving the needle or not, and to be able to see no, this is concrete, or no, this nothing has happened here. So I would say that that's the biggest thing. Also, you talk to entrepreneurs here in Silicon Valley doing little things and big things, and everybody honestly believe their organization is impacting the world. I know I've seen in how it sounds cliche when we are all talking on podcasts or doing TED Talks or doing pitches somewhere. But when we talk between each other, we really believe we're moving needles. We really believe we're having an impact. Interestingly enough, when I talk to the biggest decision makers in the world, that are governments, I talk to them. They are also the largest buyers in the world. And we can get into procurement a little bit later. But when I talk to them,
Yeah, no, I'm very keen to talk about it.
there is no sense of urgency. It's like we will get it done when we get it done. It's like they've been overwhelmed by always being in crisis mode and in let's get it done when we can get it done with what we can get it done mode. So there is no sense of, hey, I need to remember that I am the original pioneer, the one that enabled the internet, the autonomous car, the GPS, the only mission that has put the first humans on the moon and brought them back alive. They totally forgot all of that. So I'm trying to bridge that conversation on one end, reminding governments who they are. I remind them who they are, and they suddenly start lighting up. To be honest, they start like, right, we are the original pioneers. We run national labs that have we run national labs that have discovered that the universe is expanding or nuclear fusion. Yeah, I'm reminding myself of that, and then I'm leveraging private sector to provide to government this partnership that allows governments to experiment more and play more and to acknowledge, I don't know how to solve this without government have to have all the skin on the game and saying all the time, I don't know, which is what startups do. So I think that we're doing that in a very interesting way. So governments can have some friends. That's how I call it. I say governments have no friends. They don't have partners. They have people checking what they're doing wrong, when they're doing wrong, and what can I find to publish that government is doing wrong. So I tell governments, who's your friend? Okay, I'm your friend and I'm glass. So we're going to see what we need to fix. So we fix it. So when people come to see what there is, they find problems that are fixed. That's glass. That's our goal.
That's great. This is great sort of bridge into talking about glass, right? Like, it's always fascinating to go across the juxtapose between public and private services. And you're someone who's lived on both sides of that equation and work on it. And then when I think about like systems that are hard to move, that are extremely bureaucratic, that make most people sort of, their skin crawl, the immediate functions that come to mind are procurement, right? Without a doubt. I just think about it straight away. And yet here you are building a platform to try and bring transparency and efficiency into procurement. So first of all, I don't think there's anyone in the world, especially in my world of both entrepreneurship or public services, that doesn't want this procurement problem solved, because it is, it limits people, it slows things down. It's a huge frustration for people. So it's a fantastic problem to work on. And I'm grateful that you're doing it. So tell us, like, how did you decide this is the system that I'm going to tackle? And then what have been some of the lessons as you started to tackle the procurement equation? And I can tell you there's so many listeners here who have executives in massive corporations that are battling their procurement departments, innovators that want to work with these companies and help them go faster, folks that want to work with the government, and yet they can't work with them because it's so expensive to go through many month procurement process to work with them. And as you said, they're one of the biggest buyers in the market. So tell us, what was the inspiration there, and what do we need to unlearn about procurement? Because I think that in itself, it could be a 5-hour show just alone.
So procurement is the most counterintuitive thing I've done in my life. And what I'm doing now, it's literally, I'm an expert in procurement. But I learned at Matternet. So when we were doing drone delivery, I had no experience in technology. I had no experience in drones or in aeronautics. And I remember me and my co-founder, we were shocked that aerospace companies weren't building drones for transportation. Logistics companies were not building drones for transportation. We were shocked to have conversations with transportation and logistics companies, and they thinking that the natural way, the first vehicle in their fleet that was going to become fully autonomous was a vehicle that they already had on their parking lot. So they were thinking, We have trucks, we have motorcycles, we have cars, and then on the airport, we have airplanes. And one of those vehicles that we've been operating for 50 years, then we will remove the human being and that will be fully autonomous. And they didn't see drones in an orthogonal way being the first vehicle that vehicle was born on day one to be fully autonomous. It was not a vehicle that you had to, put a seatbelt and a bunch of things that because you're optimizing for the human, and then you remove the human, and then you need to remove all those pieces. And then when we were telling all these folks, the first fully autonomous vehicle that you're going to have to move things from point A to point B is going to be an autonomous drone. Not a remotely piloted drone, an autonomous drone. Even when we were looking into the patent office back in 2011, should we patent this thing? To find so very little information about drone delivery, we were thinking, this is either very smart or very stupid.
Yeah, it's unnerving. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Because nobody's talking about this. And we talked to a bunch of people, especially think about all this counterintuitiveness. These small drones could barely carry 5 pounds. And we are talking pre-Amazon, when Amazon 3 years later said, oh, yes, by the way, 86% of everything we move, if we don't aggregate it, has less than 5 pounds. We were not operating Amazon. We didn't have that data. It was just a feeling. It was just a gut. So when I remember that just by observing the problem and by asking questions, we were able to create something that the experts told us that could not be done, that didn't make sense. There was not a business case behind it. I have that so vividly from the Matternet experience. Also learning that the day that Amazon said, I want to do drone delivery, we started getting money. I'm like, this is counterintuitive. The day Amazon says they want to do the same thing I've been saying for 3 years, I should go out of business. And it's the total opposite in Silicon Valley. So I learned with Matternet that expertise, because you think you have tried everything, because you actually know so much. You don't have space to learn nothing new.
Yeah, right.
And having conversations with brilliant people that told me and my co-founder, like, drone delivery for things that less than 5 pounds don't make any sense. I remember when I started Glass, I was thinking, where am I going to start? Where am I going to start helping governments? Governments need digital signature, digital infrastructure. Government needs better TVs, better phones, better systems to train people. They need everything because they are the single largest buyer in the world. So when I was trying to decide where to start, I looked back, connecting my dots backwards, and I was like, you specialize in procurement. Why did you specialize in procurement in Washington, D.C.? Well, there's a million different reasons. Number one, George Washington University was the only one that provided me a full scholarship. So I was like, I'm going to go there. I don't want to have student debt. And they were number one on government procurement. So I'm like, if I'm getting a full scholarship, not from Georgetown, I got half a scholarship from Georgetown, but I got a full scholarship from GW. I'm going to study at GW what GW is the best at. And I specialize in government procurement, something I had never heard or done before. And then I specialized on that, and I started connecting the dots that what makes American public institutions very strong is that they're very powerful. And they are the most powerful they are is because they have the most money to execute what they say that they wanted to do. And I learned that executing what you said you wanted to do is basically spending that money. And spending that money is procurement. Where did you spend that money? To whom did you grant the money or the contract to execute something that you said as a country that was important? And where there is no money, that is not going to change. Any initiative that doesn't have budget allocated to happen is not going to exist. It's not going to materialize in the world. So when I was able to connect the dots backwards, I realized that procurement is the way that governments materialize what we discussed that was important for us as a collective, as the people. And when you connect, is a simple math. It's like what we said was important on the budget, and then how did we spend the budget? And you can see the gap. oh, we said that this was important, but that's not where we spend the money, then that's not done. And you can connect those dots little by little every time. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do something on procurement. Who's doing something on procurement? I start seeing the market. Very few people do something on procurement. Procurement platforms are very rudimentary, obsolete, 1980s looking. Nobody wants to look into procurement because it's like the worst of two worlds. A slow adopter with a lot of regulation and a lot of red tape. And in a Silicon Valley fashion, I continue asking questions. What is the lowest hanging fruit? What is the lowest friction entry point into government? What is the way that I can put myself inside government in such a way that is non-invasive? That is like, I'm here, but don't worry about me. I'm doing something you don't care about. And I discovered small purchases. Back then in 2017, in LATAM, the conversation was about small purchases, not micro purchases. The United States is one of the only countries that have determined what a micro purchase is. That is one that is under the simplified threshold. Simplified threshold is that you don't have to do a contract. You actually just request free quotes and select one. But micro purchases are the ones where you don't even have to request free quotes. You just literally find the vendor you want or find the product you want and you buy it. And you buy it through a credit card, a direct purchase order, or a petty cash purchase. These purchases in 2017 were $3,000. U.S. federal government could make any purchase under $3,000 with a simple credit card swipe. In the last 7 years, that limit has triplicated. So now small purchases, micro purchases are under 10,000. They are expected to go up to 25,000 per transaction. The number of government credit card holders, people that have a government credit card, it's doubling. And the culture of buying things on demand, as opposed to do plans that you get to never execute, like the on-demand culture is also going up. And you, as a consumer, you know this because of, the buying on demand, getting things same hour, same day and whatnot. So it's a confluence of things where you're asking a user that on their private life, they're ordering all the time, everything online, and they are making complex decisions sometimes when they're making these purchases. And then you take that same brilliant person and you make them slow and almost non-optimized on their decision-making when they're making purchases for government. So I was thinking, instead of creating a full procurement system, I'm going to create a mini procurement system just for the mini purchases. So governments can do their big procurement processes on their big platforms, Oracle, SAP, Coupa, and then their little purchases, they can do it in one little piece of software that allows them to just swipe the card and know that every time they swipe the card, the vendors in that marketplace are fully curated for government. So it's literally the confluence of e-commerce, simplicity of e-commerce, click, 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 e-commerce, with the heightened standard and compliance of government. When you bring e-commerce and government, you have something in the middle that is called G-commerce. That's what we're coining. That's how we're coining e-commerce for governments. And we've been talking about this for the last 5 years, trying to understand what is similar, what is fast, what is agile from the e-commerce world, and what needs to be compliant, what needs to be slow, what needs to be, with a red flag or a yellow flag or an orange flag.
Yeah, good governance.
And balancing all of that out.
Yeah, like one of the favorite things I ever got to do was work with 18F, and they're the US government digital services that were spun out of the back of Obamacare. And, it was fascinating. First of all, like the people that just coalesced around that agency, right? They were a lot of folks who had a passion for improving public services, and a lot of them came from the private sector and wanted to contribute in a different way. And, there was a culture clash absolutely within that entity where, there was this has rushed to move quickly but also on, a struggle to understand the culture and the systems that exist within the political system, and even as you were describing, what you're saying about this governance and procurement system, there was one of the failures really of Obamacare and the site when it was launched is that the contracts had to be with these huge entities that were multi-year, locked them in on 10-year deals around cloud provider services, or so these massive contracts that only a small number of really big players could partake in. And in essence, the ecosystem was sort of marginalized to a limited set of suppliers that could actually be part of it. But one of the things that was really fascinating to me and was how they started to embrace this idea of, as you said, like these opportunities where people could identify a new group of people that could be part of the system by using these opportunities like small payments to find a different type of supplier that could actually work within government and bring a different set of skills, mindsets, behaviors that would, in essence, work over small sort of funding cycles. So they had to produce output to achieved outcomes, which again was sort of counterintuitive to signing these big, 5-10-year deals with these huge institutions that would sort of, under deliver and until the very end of the contract. So it was a very fascinating nuance that started to appear when you were working in sort of smaller funding cycles with shorter timelines, with more measurement of outcome based on the investment that had been made. And for me, that was sort of one of these very subtle, embracing the idea of what agility is about, like working in small, fast feedback cycles, and limiting risk, because you would make these small investments in some of these new suppliers. And if it didn't work out, well, you'd spent $3,000 or $10,000 and learned that that was not the right supplier to work on that initiative, versus a smaller bet that it works and you can double down and start to lead them through maybe a more expansive process. So for me, that was one of the most fascinating parts about understanding how the actual existing system worked and then leveraging it in a positive way to actually get better outcomes, to open up the opportunity for more people to contribute and work with the government, but also manage them better through shorter, faster feedback cycles that actually had metrics and outcome that they were measured against. So it's fascinating, again, even just to hear how you sort of started to see and leverage that system too as well. What probably brings me most joy is to hear that these folks are being given more agency now, which I guess is reflected in the willingness to increase essentially their base or limit spend from $10,000 to $25,000, and giving folks agency to sort of make decisions, right, and move forward quicker on these sort of relatively small bets. A $25,000 investment compared to a $10 million or $100 million contracts that I were seeing with these massive consultancies that massively under-delivered. It's great to hear that that's happening. So what, as looking forward now, right? So Glass is a business. It's, you're getting into your 7th year of this now, which is fascinating. It's, as you say, the market is sort of opening up more and more. So what are some of the things that you're most excited about in the GovTech type space? You're obviously tackling procurement, and as I said, I'm very grateful. Thank you for doing that. Keep going. And what are some of the other areas that you're most excited about? If you think back even to the genesis really of why you started this, and other public systems you want to see improve and get better and stronger.
I think that the use of AI, so we can feed data better, faster. It happens like for us, when something is new for me and for my team, I know it's going to be new for the world, because we've been trying to tackle this problem from many different angles. And for us, the big shocker has been small businesses and economic development. So coming from the Dominican Republic, I wasn't big about small businesses. Like here, there is a big culture about small businesses at the federal, state, and local level. Everybody knows that almost all agencies have a mandate to spend between 20 to 30% of their procurement dollars into socioeconomic groups, veteran-owned, Black-owned, women-owned, LGBTQ+, business controlled or owned by those groups. And this makes sense. It's like, yeah, this is a good to do. It's a good to have. Keep the economy, moving with the little folks. But what I discovered is that, so number one, small businesses are the economic fabric of the United States. Now it's totally clear for me. But again, it's like the big discovery for procurement, it's economic development. The big discovery for the catalyzer to make better government purchases is going to come from the small business, where this is not just one more business they're fulfilling. This is their bread and butter. And where, we do three things that I think are going to be the catalyzers for unlocking a $4 trillion local government economy. Is number one, connecting small purchases to small businesses, connecting local demand with local supply, and being able to canalize local dollars to maintain local jobs. And it's interesting because government is quick to provide a subsidy or a grant to a small business. But when you give a subsidy or a grant to a small business, you're telling them, I'm helping, I'm supporting you. However, when you give your business to a business, you tell them, I'm making a purchase from you. Right. And you, as a small business owner, you get the dignity to say, I am doing what my business is meant to do, that is to do business. Interestingly enough, the more governments make purchases from small businesses, this small business can be open. That purchase from government is not going to pay taxes, but if the business is open to receive an order from government, they remain open to receive a purchase from private sector. And that purchase from an individual or private sector does capture taxes. And the more taxes small businesses capture, the more taxes they pay to whom? To government. So government has the most money, the more money to do more things. So interestingly enough, when our government is sourcing products and services to run the business of government, to run our cities, if this, this in data, bad data in, bad data out, bad vendors in, bad quality of goods and services out. So the better and more diverse businesses with amazing products, moving the needle, testing and implementing and doing more innovation on the daily basis, the more of those products get into the government market, the most governments can choose A, B, C, D, and all of those are good. So what I discovered is that the future of procurement is not a procurement. The future of procurement is e-commerce. And the future of e-commerce is not on training more the government people. It's on providing to the other side of the market because they have more than one player. So in government markets, you have two players, and we've been solely focused on the training and the contracts and the part of the government side. If we give the business side the training and the tools and the opportunity that we have given to the government side to make procurement a big thing, I think that government is able to extract more outcome out of that bucket. So small businesses honestly have been, I would say, the hidden missing piece of the formula. When you work with a small business, they respond faster. With a small business that is responsible, they have all the certifications in place. They have all the business registrations in place. They're on time with their taxes. They employ women. They employ families. They keep our economies dynamic. They don't want a grant and a subsidy. And when they get to work with government, the level of feedback these folks give us, thank you for keeping my business open for one more month. This is amazing. With this purchase, we're going to be able to make more investments into these things that we wanted to transform. And you're just like, you don't want someone so big that this $1 million purchase from government is nothing to them. You want someone that this means their bread and butter. And these are the type of businesses we are onboarding into our government marketplaces. And they're transforming how we feel about procurement. So economic development, powered by technology, because we're able to help these businesses create their first government online store, filter and clean the name of the titles and description and images that they use to sell something, and all of that we're doing a lot of AI. We're using a lot of AI. Eventually, we're going to have better, I would say, models. So when governments, the government from a city that has a socioeconomic policy of buying green, they come to the search bar and they type for paper. They don't need to say, I want paper, and remember that I have a policy to buy recycled paper. We know what city you're coming from, and we know that 3 years ago you passed this law to buy recycled paper, even if the recycled paper is $1 more, because you want to offset CO2 emissions or whatever. So we can do all of that with data that is past data from government, current data about every time they search something, and prospective data of what they need to purchase. We have access to all that data. We just need to analyze it in real time every time someone's going to come and make a purchase. So the opportunities are unlimited, and I'm very excited about that.
Well, it sounds like it. Yeah, and I'm excited just listening to your passion for the space, hearing what you're building. I think, as you say, small businesses are the lifeblood of so many economies, and when they're thriving, economies thrive. And finding ways to create those networks and connections and marketplaces within the biggest supplier or purchaser, if you will, in each of those countries, the government, is just it's a fantastic work. Paola, I'm grateful for you coming on and sharing your story. It's great work that you're doing. I'm glad that you're innovating procurement. It makes me so happy that these people like you are working on these problems. Thanks very much for sharing, and honestly, it's been great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. If you found this episode useful, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please consider leaving a rating or a review, as it helps others find our podcast. For more episode and details about the show, visit barryoreilly.com, and we'll see you on the next episode.